Okay. Hello, everyone. So as I mentioned earlier, we are recording this presentation for the WEIM Resource Sufficiency Enhancement for Track 2, for Phase 2, Track 1. We will be posting this externally in addition to the WEIM portal as well. As I mentioned earlier, we do have my producer, Cindy Hinman, who's going to be helping us monitor any questions that are coming through, making sure that if there's anything that, just to make sure that we're able to identify any questions that are coming up as I'm going through the presentation. So we've got a lot of information to share with you this morning. This training is scheduled for 2 hours. We may not take up the full duration, but I do want to make sure we give you guys enough time to ask questions for clarity and whatnot. But before I do this, I want to set the expectation that the intent of this training is more so to explain the materials that are being discussed or that are going to be implemented in this phase 2 for track 1. And that I know that there are some discussions that are taking place in tandem that may be related to policy content and whatnot, but I want to let you know that those discussions are still going on and that they will be more suited in a different platform, most likely through the BPM stakeholder process. So I just want to set that expectation that this training is more so to go over the materials that are changing. I want to make sure I give you guys everything in preparation for the implementation that's coming up on June 1st. So again, any questions that are going through the PRR process will be most likely suited in the BPM stakeholder platform. And we do have our folks that are working on preparing responses to those questions that are coming through. And we do appreciate your feedback. We want to be able to give you those answers, but we do have folks that are currently working on getting you those answers to make sure that we address them in a timely fashion. So just wanted to set that expectation. Before I start, are there any questions that you guys want to bring up prior to starting the training? Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, this is going to be a pre-market sim training that we are going to provide today in preparation of the market sim that will be coming up in the next few days. So let's go ahead and get started. So the learning objective for today is to explain how the new ETAG rules are going to work for the CAISO BAA World Priority Export. We want to make sure that we clarify, if anything, to help you determine how you're going to, or actually help you understand what's needed as you're getting ready to submit your ETAG. So if there's something that's changing, we want to clarify it in this training. And then also we want to talk about the requirements and process for submitting the assistant energy request. There is a change that's coming up, and it is a new product that's going to be optional to, or it's an interim solution and is available for those who are interested in this product. So we want to go over what those requirements are and what you need to do should you decide to opt in for this product. So before we get started, let's talk about the initiative milestones. So far we have, it's already gone through a majority of the milestones already. Right now, what we're waiting for is to post the configuration guides. And this is, again, specific to the settlement changes. We have the training that's scheduled for today. Again, this is going to be recorded, and we're going to focus primarily on what's changing, the materials that are going to change. And then we do have the market simulation that is going to be starting on May 1st. So this is why we want to make sure we provide this information to you prior to the market sim. And then, of course, the production activation date is slated for June 1st currently. And unless something changes, we'll let you know. But right now, we are targeting June 1st of this year. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, there's a few things that are changing with this RSEE Phase 2, Track 1. Again, we're going to talk primarily about what's going on in Track 1. There's 3 tracks. This first track is going to be the initial track that where we're going to cover the tagging rules. There's also the, what I mentioned earlier, the assisted energy transfer. I know there's been conversations about that. And again, as I mentioned, we do have a separate platform for that that will cover those concerns, and our folks are all also aware of the questions that are coming in, and we'll address those in the stakeholder platform. So I just wanted to let you know that. And in addition, there are some settlement charges that are going to be posted. So as I mentioned, the config guide. So there's 2 new charge codes that are resulted as of the assisted energy transfer product. And then lastly, we're going to go over some changes that are happening in OASIS and CMRI. There's a new report, and there's also updates to existing reports. So we'll cover those as well. So now let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk a little bit about the e-tags. Now there's an e-tag, there's updates to the e-tag rules for the lower market priority exports from the CAISO. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now today's focus again is going to be on the low priority exports. We're going to be focusing on these 4 in particular: the day-ahead LPT, the real-time LPT, the day-ahead economic, should I say, and the real-time economic exports. And they all fall under the low priority level. So these are the ones that we're going to be focusing in terms of what changes are going to be happening for the e-tag. I do have some news on our subject matter experts on here who will be able to elaborate on those changes, so I will be leaning on them for some additional clarification. So let's go ahead and move on. So what's changing with the LPT exports from the CAISO, from CAISO that are tagged? We are going to require some changes. So basically a change in your behavior to be able to take those low priority exports and tag them as firm provisional energy, in addition to designating the associated CAISO real-time market priority. So we want to make sure that you are identifying these in the tagging system for the low priority exports and tagging them as firm provisional. And so by doing that, it's going to help us identify which exports to curtail. So if we need to go through a list of which exports that are low priority, that are the lower priority, should I say, the ISO will be able to identify those appropriately and curtail them according to our tariff requirements. So that's why we want to make sure that there is great emphasis on how you're going to tag, or how you're going to tag these lower priority exports in accordance with the CAISO real-time market priorities, in addition to allowing us to be able to identify them as they come in so that we can tag, curtail accordingly, should I say. And then also another benefit is going to remove those low priority exports from being included in the CAISO's upward capacity resource and sufficiency enhancements that are scheduled in real time. So those are some of the that's the reason why we're explaining the changes in terms of the e-tag. So I do want to note that the low priority exports are the CAISO export self-schedule. So, and they're not backed by designated non-supporting resources, and the exports are resulted from economic bids. So. Now, that was a lot of information I just went over. So some of the things that, so we have here an example of what's going to happen when you have to modify your tag. So let's say, for instance, the scheduling coordinators have been awarded, they receive a market award for 100 megawatts out of the CAISO VA, and now you have to tag your resources. So how do you, how do you process that tag? Well, here's here's an example of, again, those 100 megawatt awards that you received, and you received multiple market priority types. There are 4 multiple market priority types. And so you have to divvy them up. So you take the 100, divvy them up by the market award accordingly. And then you're going to have to separate 4 different e-tags for those as opposed to 1, because you want to make sure you account for those market priority types. So as you can see in here, what started initially with just one market award for the different market priority types, you have to submit 4 different tags for them to account for the market priority type, but more so for the generation, so we can easily identify the generation product type. Earlier I mentioned that you're going to have to modify how you submit your e-tags, and you're going to have to indicate that they are now considered as firm provisional, but you also want to account for those firm provisional for each of those market priority types. So from here you see you started off with the 100 megawatts, and then you end up with 4 different tags. You're just going to have to account for each of those individually. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to have some of my subject matter experts kind of elaborate on this change and why it's important. Maybe Michael Martin, maybe Sherry. Can I have you guys talk a little bit more about these changes?
Sure. This is Michael Martin. In fact, would you mind jumping back a couple of slides when you discussed kind of at a higher level before you jump down into these, example details?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right here. Yeah, so you noted the firm provisional tagging there, the very first one, and then the next 2 bullets, you said it identifies the lower priority and it removes them from the ISO's RC requirement. But I think you should add an important bullet here that what tagging as firm provisional provides is the visibility to the sync BA of what they're getting. So the sync BA now can see, oh, this is backed by a low priority resource in the CAISO market. So I think that bullet should be noted here, and it's important, a primary reason why we're doing this, in addition to these, items that help with manual curtailment in an EEA3, a very rare condition, in these tight condition days. But again, that's kind of a main reason why this is going in.
Thank you, Michael. Exactly what you just said. So as Michael Martin mentioned, this is going to give the sync BAs visibility. Those are the folks that are receiving the megawatts. It's going to give them visibility to the proper status of what they're receiving. And then in turn, it's going to allow us to curtail in the event that there are extreme events, and we'll be able to curtail correctly. So this is really just giving our sync BA the visibility to know what they have. And then when we do need to curtail, they'll know exactly which ones we need to curtail. So in a way, it's helping both sides, right? We're just making sure that if we do need to curtail, the sync BA are going to have an idea of which ones we're going to be touching, basically. We're going to be curtailing, so that way there's that transparency and visibility. So thank you, Michael, for adding that to that. So did you guys have any other feedback that you want to include or questions in the meantime? Cindy, do we have any questions in the chat?
Are no questions in the chat, and I don't see any. Oh, I do see a couple of hands raised. It looks like Chen Yu, will you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? And then Todd Ryan has a question after that.
Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, good morning. This is Chen Yu from PG&E. I just have a question from the timeline perspective, where saying the market sim starting in May 1st. I would like to clarify, it's the May 1st, it's a connectivity test, or the RSEE code will be in map stage ready for market sim.
I'm going to also reach out to our market sim team, but
Chang is here.
Go ahead. Thank you, Vong. Thank
Okay.
you, Trang.
So Chunyu, thanks for the question. For map stage, the code for RSEE is already there. And internally, we're working through our final readiness criteria to present to a quality review board to approve the start of market simulation on May 1st. And we settle Tuesdays and Thursdays in the month of May. So the first settling trade date will be the 2nd. So to answer your question, starting the market simulation on May 1st, that means when we plan to have the code certified and ready for market simulation, including the systems for connectivity. And then as far as the first trade date, that would be the 2nd.
Thank you, Trang. That's helpful.
Thanks.
Okay, next we have Todd Ryan. Todd, can you unmute yourself? And when you're done, unraise your hand.
Good morning, Todd Ryan with Pacific Gas and Electric. Just a question about your understanding of the policy, not debating the policy. That third bullet of excluding low priority exports from the RSE, the resource efficiency evaluation, is it specific just to the upward capacity test, or is it from all resource efficiency evaluations in the WEIM? Like the flex test?
So low priority exports, I'm not even sure, do we even have a low priority import? Sherry might have to help me there. And do EIM folks outside of the ISO, well, you know, they don't have a low priority export. So I'm struggling with the question.
I guess my concern is that my understanding of the policy is that low priority were excluded from all RSE, all the resource efficiency evaluations are in totality. And my concern is that maybe if the policy were misinterpreted, that it might be included in the flex test, and that might.
Right. Okay, I understand your question now. Yeah, so the bullet does say inclusion in the upward capacity RSE. It should say inclusion in upward capacity and upward flex RSE. So it is both the capacity and the flex test.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for that. We'll also make those updates on the slides.
We have another question from Jonathan Glasgow. Unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Hi, Jonathan Glasgow, Puget Sound Energy. So this is just strictly a change on the tagging, correct? It's not, because my understanding is that low priority exports are still, you know, if you have an export in the day ahead, and it doesn't clear, and if there's an issue with RUC, it still can get cut even if it's not in an EEA, correct? And this is just, and this is just basically you're putting this on the tag so that the sync is aware that even though we're not in an EEA, it could get cut.
Yes, there's no change to RUC. There's no change to cyber on how, you know, your bids are shown as your priority is visible. Yeah, this is a, you know, tagging change for transparency on both sides, the sync BA and for the ISO real-time operators.
And where exactly in the tag are we supposed to be making this change?
I think that's a great question, and I think that is coming up in this presentation. So I'll wait for her to get to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
There's another question from Dave Zavarek. Dave, go ahead. Unmute yourself. Oh.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Dave Zavarek with ACES Power. You might get to this later as well, but a question on the consequence if an LPT export is not tagged firm provisional and it's instead tagged firm. Will the tag be denied, or will it be approved and it just won't have the visibility to the sync BA? Thank you.
Okay, so excellent question, and honestly, I think we expected this question. So the tariff authority still, is there, and the BPM, mirrors that it could be denied, and because it's not tagged correctly. And I'll say this out loud. On day one, we're not going to put in a automation to automatically deny everything, because that, we don't want to impact your system, your processes or ours. So in full transparency, we're not going to do that. So we have other tracks going forward on further automation. We can in real time look at the tag and contact you and do other steps, but we're not going to do anything drastic to impact operations.
Thank you for that clarification, Michael.
All right, I don't see any further questions right now, Mo, so you can continue on.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry for jumping in late. I'm sorry, I kind of jumped on a little bit late. I missed the part under what scenario would we be required to change or update these tags to low priority?
So the process then is that when you receive your day ahead award, and I know some folks create tags immediately upon seeing their results, and you see the priority, you see it in cyber, that you create it then. You created it with as firm provisional, and you note the low priority in the miscellaneous field that we'll be discussing. And in real time, the same thing. So we recognize it's a process change. So these things you have to work through.
Yeah, so I'm just, because if this can be excluded from our capacity and flex tests, I'm just trying to make sure I understand when we would have to designate these as low priority.
As far as the low priority exports being removed from the capacity and flex test, that's taken care of in the market side in that RSE logic.
Right.
So
I get that. But of course, we would I don't think we would want to exclude them from any of our tests or our RSE tests. And so it seems to me that we would not, unless there's a good reason to, we would not want to designate these as low priority, unless I'm not understanding something, which may be true.
Maybe we're talking past each other. The low priority is assigned in the market based upon the cyber bid and the rules that are enforced there and awarded. It's not an aftermarket decision. Maybe are we talking past each other on what the low priority export is?
Well, keep going. I'll tell you once I understand what you're.
Sure.
What you're
So there's let me back up. So in PAs are ISO and our neighbors every day and the day in advance they do a resource plan. You raise your hand, you say I've got all this generation and this is how all this load that I need to meet tomorrow, and this is the generation and this is how I'm going to do it. And when you identify a generator on your resource plan, it's kind of yours. It's like, and in ISO terms, we rely on the RA process. So we say that's ours. Now, in cases where you're using, let's say, extra capacity of a generator that was really on someone else's plan, well, that's their generator because they identified it on their resource plan. You're welcome to use the capacity, but in an EEA3 situation, and this is where the tariff rules and NERC and FERC approved this, that the BA has the ability to say, hey, that was really our resource and we need it now. We get that you had a deal to use extra capacity if it was available, but in an EEA3 condition, we have the ability to curtail it. Does that background help?
Yes. Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I don't see any other questions. Just a reminder, when you do have questions, please raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can put your questions in the chat. Go ahead, Mo.
Thank you, Cindy. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next. And I believe we've gone through this one already, so let me go back to where we're currently at. So accounting for the lower priority and low priority exports in the CAISO, MBA RC obligation, the exports for the ISO are based on what's cleared in our market clearing process. And for the WMBAAs, for those exports, they're submitting those exports based on what can be supported in their supported by their own resource. Michael, I'm going to have you, if I may, I'm going to have you explain this one a little clearer, so that way you can add some additional clarification to this specific item right here, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm sorry, I turned away just for a moment and managed to miss the question. Was there a question asked, or?
No question. I just wanting to see if you can clarify this piece. The second item right there where it says for the CAISO, the low priority exports can be cleared in the real-time market based on supply from scheduling WM energy transfers into the CAISO. I was wondering if you can provide some clarification on this piece.
Sure. I think it goes back. Let's go through each bullet. So on the second part, the low priority exports to clear the market. Based upon, and let me read this. The low priority exports may cause the ISO to fail. So if we are counting the megawatts that are going out of our system, when we kind of have the right to raise our hand and say, hey, if we fail the RSE, we need those megawatts. Again, going back to the way I described it, that it was on our resource plan, we really shouldn't fail the RSE because of that, because we do have the ability in an EEA3 and an RSE failure situation to use those megawatts. So that's why I think FERC agreed that we shouldn't count it in the RSE test.
Thank you, Michael. Do we have any specific questions for this particular comment, or we can move on? But I just want to make sure that this piece right here is clear. Is that we're as Michael mentioned, we're not going to count it, so that way in a way it'll be more beneficial to the for the RSE test if we consider this. Modifying this requirement right here. So, all right, I'm going to move on. Oh, go ahead.
And I want to add one more comment on this. It also works the other way around. If there's a resource in, say, the ISO's area, and it is not on our resource plan, not an RA resource in the cases where we use RA. So it's a non-RA resource, and we say, and it is exporting to a neighbor, that is a high priority. We consider it the same way, just as we're saying for the ISO. In other words, it's on your plan. We can't say, oh, we're going to curtail this one first. So we honor it the other direction also. So it's an important point that it's just, good neighborly, good utility practice that we identify, we protect yours, and we display and are transparent about our low priority. Okay, thanks. Back to you.
Oh, thank you. It's essentially a mutual consideration on both sides, right? Both on the CAISO BA and WMBA side. So it's just making sure that we are following the same guidelines. So thank you, Michael. So earlier, there was a question that was asked about, you know, now that we're going to have to submit these e-tags a different way than we normally do for the firm provisional, how do we do that? So here, according to our tariff requirement or updates, we are asking folks to modify your behavior essentially, right? To modify how you're submitting your e-tags, and the way that we want you to modify going forward is to make sure that for lower priority exports, we want to make sure that you include the GFP, the generation firm provision for your lower CAISO market priority types in the market path. So as you're submitting your e-tags, you want to include this GFP in your submission, so that way it helps us identify that it is one that will allow us to see as we're getting ready to determine which ones to curtail in those events should it come up. So it's just going to be a little change in the way you do submit your e-tags. The next one's going to be a little more, add a little more clarification on this. So there is the miscellaneous info field where you're going to add an additional piece of information. So for that, you're going to be adding a new item, and it's called the CAISO priority type. So here you want to indicate your market award, your market priority award type on here. So as your group, when you're submitting your e-tag, you want to include this additional piece of information here. It's going to allow our system to be able to identify that selection or that indicator right there and be able to put you into, in a way, a category. So that way, as we're going through, as we're manually reviewing these resources and trying to determine which ones to curtail, this is going to help us in our system be able to identify those as we're trying to appropriately curtail these items. So this is one of the changes that are really important for you to incorporate into your e-tagging process. So there's going to be some more updates on this, or it's already out there, but at least I want to make sure you recognize that this is an important element to include as you're doing your e-tag submissions. So now let's move on to the curtailment during the emergency conditions. I'm going to lean a little more on our subject matter experts on this because they will have some examples and be able to provide more background as to why we're doing this. But essentially, what does the LPT priority curtailment look like during an emergency condition? I know that this is something that is also covered in some of the discussion, but like I mentioned, this is more so trying to help identify what the lower priority curtailments will be. Will be, I guess you could say, well, what to expect essentially. So, as it states on here, the CAISO BAA operators are going to curtail these exports within the hour in the event that we don't have enough to meet our loads or reserve obligations. So we are obligated to do that. And I believe this is also detailed in the tariff in addition to our BPM. And then to accommodate these curtailments for the lower priority exports, we're going to look at we're going to look at the schedules for the export energies, and then also the exports that are backed by generation from non-supporting capacity as firm provisional. So we're going to identify those specific LPT priority exports as firm provisional energy. So in a way, you know, we want to make sure that if we have to curtail in these extreme conditions, we want to be able to identify these resources in terms of how they're tagged, and that's why it's important for you to identify them as firm provisional. And then on here, as we're reviewing the items that will be tagged, this right here shows you the order, the following, or the order of how the low priority exports are going to be tagged. First, we're going to look at the real-time economics, then the real-time LPTs. Then afterwards, we're going to look at the day-ahead economics, and then the day-ahead LPT. So in these orders, this is what we'd normally consider as we're getting ready to decide which ones to curtail first. So with that, do we have any questions specific to this one so far, Cindy? This is the extent of the tag and rule update. So we talked about how folks will have to modify their process in terms of how they're submitting their e-tags. They're going to have to make sure that they include the, for lower priority tags, they have to include the GFP, which is the firm provisional, so that way it will allow us to identify which ones to curtail first. And we want to do it correctly, so that's why we need you to help us as we're manually figuring out which ones in these events. And then as Michael Martin mentioned before, in our next track for resource sufficiency evaluation phase 2, we will have a better way to validate this information in our system. But for now, we're reaching out to you guys to help us be able to identify these e-tags for lower priority, so that way we can curtail accordingly. We do have the authority to curtail, but we want to make sure we do this right, and we want to make sure we're following the instructions and meeting the same guidelines as our partners. So we want to make sure we do this right. It's essentially why we're doing this, so that way we can identify those specific resources and be able to curtail them appropriately.
Mo, there are a couple of questions, and let me ask them for you. They're both from Mariano Meza. Is the second bullet on slide 14 equivalent to saying all exports by RA resources are considered firm provisional? Is that what we're saying?
Michael, Sherry, can I have you guys add to that?
So other than an export that is backed by generation from from a non-RA resource, and that's exactly the example I used. If it's non-RA, it's on your resource plan, then that would be a high priority one. So that exception is a high priority. But anything that is, let's see. Hold on a second.
I can just, so the question is, that's correct, right? So if it's an RA resource that's backing this export, you would tag that as GFP. That would be firm provisional.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thanks, Sherry. Interrupted there. Thanks for finishing that.
Mariano also had an additional question. The information on slide 15 is located in cyber.
Thank you, Mariano.
So in cyber, the resources are identified and are connected to a priority. You have a resource and an amount of capacity on that resource, and when you bid it, as long as you don't exceed that, your priority is protected. I'm sorry, I should have started with the correct context. A high priority export is protected in cyber and identified. So you have that protected. A lower priority one is then a default if you don't have that higher priority. Bottom line, yes, you do see it in cyber.
Okay, we have two other questions on the from our participants with hands raised. The first one is Jonathan Glasgow. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
All right, Jonathan Glasgow, Puget Sound Energy. Just want to reiterate so that there's no confusion here. The slide 15 was just showing what the curtailment process is in an emergency situation once EEAs have been declared. But that doesn't, but that, even if we're not in an emergency, if RUC is deficient, then these will still, LPTs will be cut, correct?
That is absolutely correct. This is the exact order in outlined in BPM and tariff, and only relates to the emergency condition of EEA3. We even spelled that out exactly, right? Because in backing up on what firm provisional means, it means this is energy. I'm telling you, this energy is coming, and it has a provision, and the provision is, quote, mutually agreed upon. Well, we described it. It's in the tariff and BPM, and that's the communication between us both. But yeah, it is definitely locked in just for EEA3 purposes.
Right. So it's still, you might not be in an EEA3 or any EEA for that matter. But if RUC comes up a little bit short, then these LPTs could still get cut.
So yeah, so I don't like the word cut, and folks shouldn't use it. RUC is an economic solution. So I think that's a better way.
If you're reducing a tag, I mean, that's the industry lingo for reducing a tag, is it gets cut for reliability purposes, or it gets reduced for transmission.
So here's the process and the way that I would say that. You have, let's say there's a deal and an agreement between you and someone else for 100 megawatts, and you self-schedule that in IFM, and it clears. IFM will say, sure, 100 megawatts. But when RUC comes along, the constraint that RUC has is it looks at the load forecast also, and then says, well, I know you put it in at a self-schedule, but now that we're looking at the load forecast or the capacity on an interface, then the market solution is less than the self-schedule. So I know you use the word cut, but it's really a market solution.
So for the tag itself, we will make an adjustment post-RUC, right? In the day ahead after RUC, after all the day ahead schedules have been posted. And if your RUC award is lower than your IFM award, we've been asking for you to adjust your tag to the RUC award. Then when we get to HASP, whatever cleared RUC may or may not clear HASP. The market performs adjustments to these schedules, right? The only curtailment, true curtailment, happens by an operator post-HASP within the hour or for the next hour if, it's close to that next hour.
Oh. So
the market is what's making the adjustments, and then the tag gets adjusted to whatever the market award is.
Okay. So if I clear the 100 in an IFM and RUC, and say RUC says only 75 will flow, I could still put in the full 100 into the real time, right? Or no?
You could. I will tell you that there is a. We'll get into this, and there'll be some market notifications, but we will actually start automatically adjusting tags to their RUC awards here fairly soon, probably within the next couple of months.
So that's a new process. Currently, you do not adjust tags. If it clears the IFM, then the tag stays there until real time. If there's a, if it doesn't clear HASP, then it would
That
get
is
adjusted.
correct. Currently, your 100 megawatts would stay, even if RUC was only 75, your tag would stay at 100 until it cleared HASP. If your 100 cleared HASP, then your tag's fine.
Okay. I'm just curious, is there a different price for firm provisional versus firm transmission?
Well, from the WEC criterion, there's nothing that says it has to be a different price, or there's no requirement that you have to do anything different like carry reserves. Folks might have different internal procedures and rules, but the criterion doesn't have anything.
Okay, but okay, thank you.
Okay, the next question comes from Robert Fisher. Robert, go ahead.
I apologize. This is Robert Fisher with NV Energy. Can you go back to the slide in regards to the bid range capacity test and the flex ramp test? I wanted to clarify that you said the LPT exports won't count towards the test. I just want to clarify it and make sure that is it real-time LPT exports won't count towards the test, or is it both day ahead and real time? Because my understanding is the day ahead LPTs would still count towards the test.
The day are you talking about EDAM? Because RSC.
No.
EDAM, RSC.
So if an LPT clears RUC, it should still count towards the test. And thank you for going back to the slides, because it does not it requires low priority exports and firm provisional energy. Is associated with real-time market priority, identifies exports so load that can be curtailed according to, removes low priority exports. Yeah, it doesn't, that are only scheduled in real time. Okay, so it is only scheduled in real time. So if you clear day ahead, it still counts towards the test. So it's like answered my question. Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that.
All right, the next question is from Dave Zavarik, and that's the last one we have right now. Dave, go ahead.
No question, just a comment following up on my earlier question regarding the consequences of not tagging firm provisional. I guess I'll just say our strong preference is to deny the tags as soon as this is implemented if they're incorrectly tagged. When we purchase power either from marketers or from a counterparty out of the ISO, and we don't have that visibility, and the tag is not either denied or some kind of consequence, it's rather misleading. And with this being implemented June 1st ahead of the summer, I guess I'll just say this isn't a problem 99.9% of the time, but it's the 0.1% of the time that we are concerned about. So if those consequences or tag denials can be implemented along with the go live on June 1st, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. And if you have a question, please raise your hand. If you're done asking your questions, can you lower your hand? All right. Mo, why don't you move on?
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you everyone for the feedback. It's really helpful as we're working to improve the process in this track. Like I said, your feedback is very very helpful, and it's going to help us make this more transparent and eventually help us on both ends. So thank you for all the clarifying questions, and also my SMEs. Thank you for providing and elaborating those questions. So let's go ahead and move on to the next important topic. Now we're going to be talking about the assistant energy transfer. Now I do want to set the expectation that we are aware that there are some discussions on this in the that are going on in other platforms and other stakeholder platforms. And just so folks know, we do have folks that are reviewing your feedback. They're equally as important. So we want to make sure that we review and provide a response to you guys, you know, that will be addressed, like I said, with the whole team, and then again, be focused and be covering that information elsewhere, but not in this platform. But we would want to talk about, you know, what's changing, what is it, what's changing, what do we expect for you guys to do, and then kind of go from there. But any policy-related questions, we'll make sure we continue that conversation in a separate platform because they are important. So let's go ahead and move forward. So the assistant energy transfer. This is a new product that is a result of us wanting to essentially find a way for the WEIM entity or WMBA to be able to provide assistance for the balancing authority areas who have failed the resource sufficiency evaluation test. We want to offer this as a way for you to still be able to meet your needs, but it does come at a cost. So, as I mentioned, this product that we're going to be covering was introduced as part of Resource Sufficiency Evaluation Enhancements Phase 2 in Track 1. This is something new that we're going to be talking about. It's new to everyone, but it is an interim solution to help with our WEIM BAAs. Now, as I mentioned before, this is, you know, trying to help our neighbors, folks that are participating in the WEIM BAAs, including CAISO BAA, is to essentially not have your ETSR transfers limited according to our current rules when you fail the upward resource sufficiency capacity and flex upward test. So if you fail those tests, you have the option to opt into this product that will be available to you guys starting on May 1st. It's going to allow the WMBA, including CAISO BA, to be able to have access to extra supply that's offered by other WEIM entities, or BAA, should I say. But again, it does come at a cost. So how does it work? For the CAISO BAA, there is, for the CAISO BAA, it's a little different. WM BAA will have the option to opt into this voluntary product. For the CAISO BAAs, for instance, the scheduling coordinators, that all are under the CAISO BA, you guys will be, or should I say, the CAISO will be able to make that determination on if there is a need to opt in for the assistant energy transfer. It's not one that we take lightly. We will be reviewing those criteria to make sure that it is the right thing to do. Although CAISO does have the authority to opt in, we're not obligated to opt in unless needed. So it really depends on that situation, the extreme conditions. So there's a lot of factors that go in before that decision is made. And again, I understand there is a discussion on this, but we're still trying to figure out, you know, what is best for our customers in the meantime. So. Now, for the BAAs that do decide to opt into this assistant energy transfer product, there is, as I mentioned, there is going to be a cost, a surcharge. So this will be in addition. Now, when WEIM BAAs or CAISO BAAs fail the resource sufficiency evaluation test, they are going to be able, should they opt in, they are going to be able to have the option to use this product, to opt in and designate what time frame they want this to be available to them. As I mentioned, there is that ex post surcharge that will start, that can start off at $1,000 per megawatt. And in addition, those surcharges will be added to the applicable LMP, the locational marginal price, after it clears the market. And this will be specific to the assistant energy transfer. So this participation is optional, but it does come at a cost. So this is where we want you to talk amongst your entities to determine if this is the right product for you. This is one of the, interim solutions that we've come up with to try to help our neighbors to see if there's something that we can help you continue to be able to meet your needs. And again, this is a voluntary, an optional product, and we want to make sure that if this is right for you, that you have access to this product and that you can opt in to receive those assistance from your, to receive the assistance, or should I say, leverage the assistance from your neighbors. So because this is an interim solution for now, it will be sunset by December 31st, 2025. So it may go away by 2025, but it is available for you to decide if this works out for you. And if it does, it will be in place until 2025. Now for the CAISO BAA, how is that, what is the criteria for the CAISO BAA to determine if it is the right thing for them to do to be able to opt in on behalf of scheduling coordinators, so essentially CAISO BAA as a whole? There are some criteria that we do consider. We're looking at the RA capacity and the RA credit forecast, as if it's less than the demand forecast plus the contingency reserve requirement, regulation reserve plus the 5% of demand. That would be one of the criteria that we would use to consider opting in. The other one is if we take the net RA capacity and plus the RA credit forecast, if that is less than the net demand forecast plus the contingency reserve requirement plus regulation reserve plus the 5% of demand forecast, we will opt in. Again, we review this, we make sure that it's properly vetted out before even considering to opt in. So these are two of the criteria that we do consider. And in the event that the criteria for the first two that are taken into consideration, and let's say that we're on day 8 and it's a Friday or it's a non-business day, which could possibly be a holiday. If there are those instances where those are included in those date range, we may decide to opt in or opt out based on that scenario at that moment in time. So really the CAISO will take into consideration these conditions, these criteria before even deciding to opt in. We do have a team of folks that do review just to make sure that this is the appropriate methodology. So, but this right here is specific to the CAISO BAA. Now for the WEIM entity, or to say BAAs, if they are interested in opting in, what do? Once you've already talked to your entity or your BAA and decided, this may be a product that may be beneficial to your BAA, how do you opt in? So should you decide to, the process for opting in is really to submit a city ticket. So you would have to submit a city ticket and it would go to our master file folks. So you'd submit a request to master file, but through city. And if you don't have city access, you can work with your user access administrators, your UAA, to get you those access. Where can you get to city? You can go and you can, for the WEIM entity, you can access city through the WEIM portal, or you can also go directly to the city application link, which I've listed here below. So as I mentioned, how do you opt in should you decide to be able to submit your designation or election to master file? It will need to go through it will need to go through city. Okay. In city, you're going to have the option to submit to select the tab to be able to submit your inquiry. You have to, and again, if you decide to opt in and submit your request, you're going to have to designate, or should I say, use the inquiry ticket record type. So make sure you select that one, because there is a change in that page that allows you to indicate which ones indicate that you want to opt in. So when you're in city, you want to make sure that you select a button. There's going to be a new button in city. There is already. You'll notice that it'll say Assistant Energy Designation Request. You're going to have to indicate if you are trying to opt in or opt out, provide a start date and an end date. So here is a screenshot of what it looks like in city. So when you're submitting your request, should you decide to opt in, and again, this is for WEIM and BAAs, Should you decide you're going to go through city, you're going to indicate that button, a radio button right there to indicate that it is an assistant energy designation request. You have to indicate that, otherwise it will not be routed correctly. It will go directly to our master file folks for them to review. In the subject line, you want to make sure, as I mentioned, indicate if you are opting in or opting out. This will help flag those requests that are coming through. And then in the description, specify specify the start date and the end date. Now, here's the last important piece of information, is that when you submit your election, your designations must be submitted in city to master file by 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And it has to be at least 5 business days in advance of the effective start date. So 5 business days in advance of the effective start date that you specify here. And it must be submitted by 11 a.m. PST, not after 11, but by or before 11 a.m. And this is a really important criteria, because if you miss those times, so let's say you submit it after 11 a.m. and you want it for a specific trade date or start date, those dates must follow these guidelines. Otherwise, they most likely will be rejected or at least declined, and you may not be able to proceed. So it's really important that you follow these guidelines, provide those key information, and then they have to follow those specific timelines in city. Now, what if you are not interested in opting in for the assistant energy transfer product? Is there anything that you need to do? Is there anything that you need to do differently? If you're not interested, you decide, you know what, this is not going to work for me. What should I do? Are there any actions to make sure that I'm not included in here? There's really nothing that you need to do, because in master file, for the VAs that are participating in the WEIM, there's a default flag in master file that is set to opting out unless you request to opt in. So if you're not interested and this is not the right product for you, then there's no further action on your part. The master file already has you set to opt out until you physically submit a city ticket to master file to request to opt in. So essentially, no action on your part. I'm going to pause right there. I know that there's been a few questions that have come through. Cindy, can you see what kind of questions are there and if there's any hand raises?
Sure, Mo. So there was a question, we're getting some other questions here. There was a question that Luis answered. Mariano Meza asked, the available balancing capacity, ABC, counts the credit to reduce surcharge megawatts, correct? And Luis responded that that was correct. ABC Reg Up for WEIM entities or Reg Up for ISO BAA doesn't count toward assistance energy transfer quantity that is subject to the surcharge. There was, the next question was from Aaron, and his question was, what is the benefit of AET over infeasibility pricing? Can someone address that?
So the assistance energy transfer concept, it's kind of like automating, in today's world, the emergency assistance process. Today's world, you're in an emergency situation, and you call your neighbor and you negotiate, megawatts and a price right then, $1,000 or whatever it is. In emergency assistance, it's automating it with a surcharge on top of the LMP. As far as infeasibility pricing, well, if we're in an infeasibility situation, the prices are likely going to be high, and then this product will be on top of that. So the dollars, are adding up here. So, but everyone needs to be aware of that cost. And I think, and if I can continue a little bit, and I think the idea, kind of the tenet of all of WEIM, the EIM market, out the gate was we weren't going to lean on each other. You're supposed to come to the potluck, with enough to carry your own area and not lean on your neighbors. Well, now we're saying, well, inside of EIM, we can put in automation to help that emergency situation, but it comes at a cost, and that shouldn't be an economic solution that we're solving and folks get to lean on each other. Did that answer your question?
You know, actually, Aaron said he got his question answered, but I didn't.
Yeah, no, kind of. I was just going to follow up on that, though. Like, it just seems to me that, you know, like, yeah, I get it. It helps the EIM area because no one's leaning on someone else. But in terms of economics for a given BA, it doesn't, I'm still not clear on the benefit considering the pricing parameters appear to be the same. So I'm still trying to think through the benefits of opting in.
Right. So there are some discussions on enhancements to the pricing, model that's being proposed. I agree with, that it could be granular, could be better, could be improved. In fact, I think even our policy folks saying this is a good step forward. It can definitely be improved. It could be better. But so with that, yes, you need to weigh the cost here, or if you just want to do things manually, that's all good too.
Thank you.
Okay, we have some conversation in the chat that I'll go over, and then so far there are two questions with hands raised, two people with hands raised, so I'll get to them right after I get through this chat. Mariano Meza had a question about if an EIM BAA opts in, fails flex up, and the EIM transfer is less than ABC, does that mean the surcharge is zero? Luis, thank you for answering, and he said, yes, that is correct. If your ABC reg up ultimately reduces your net import to zero, then your surcharge quantity will be zero. Mariano followed up with, okay, so it seems that an EIM BAA would be able to import at least ABC by opting in, while if they didn't opt in, they might not be able to import at all if they failed flex up. Can somebody respond to that comment? And then we'll move on to the hands raised.
Someone else go ahead. I'm repeating this to understand it, but if someone else, let's see.
Do we have someone from our settlements or from our policy side that might be able to help clarify that last question? Just looking at see who we have on our subject matter expert side.
Yeah, this is Luis. I'm also trying to understand the question a little bit here. If I'm understanding it correctly, I don't think that there's any, hold on, let me just read this again. Okay. Yeah, I don't think by opting in or opting out has anything to do with the limitations of what you're able to import, aside from if you did opt out and you did fail your flex ramp up capacity tests, your ETSRs would be limited, to your previous, either the base schedule or your FMM interval. So that's the only limitations that are set if you actually opt out. And that also goes back to the question earlier, what are the benefits of having to opt in rather than not, right? Obviously, we have price implications. Is it cheaper to just have the economics run and have uneconomic dispatches for certain resources, or is it better for me to opt in? But I guess from a reliability quantity perspective, obviously, if you do opt in, your transfers wouldn't be limited. Therefore, you have options to consume energy from other EIM entities. But going back to the question, yeah, I don't think by opting in or opting out, it has anything to do with, limiting your imports to your ABC quantity.
Mario just raised his hand. So Mario, do you want to clarify your question?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Thanks. So the way I was thinking about it is if an entity fails flex up, their imports might be capped, so they won't be able to import any more than they were previously, potentially. But if they participate in this program and they fail flex up, they could potentially import up to the ABC amount they hold at no surcharge. So it's different to today in that today, if we fail, we can't import. But if we opt in, we could theoretically import up to our ABC at no additional cost. Now,
Yeah,
if we import
what
more than ABC, then there is a cost if we import more than an ABC. But now we have, by opting in, we have access now to at least an amount of imports equal to ABC with no surcharge.
That's correct.
That's what.
Yeah,
that's right.
All right. Question. Yeah, if you don't opt in and you're limited, you're up to your ABC. You know, if you opt in and you fail, all the megawatts are subject to the surcharge.
Except for but you subtract out the ABC first, right? So let's say if we imported 200 megawatts and our ABC is 300, the surcharge would be 0, right?
And I'm pretty sure, and I've got some other folks here to confirm, but the design is all megawatts, including below. And I think that's an opportunity for improvement, but it starts at megawatt 1.
Michael, we do have a requirement in settlements to calculate a credit for regulation up. So we reduce the net imports by the regulation up, and that's the only quantity that's subject to the surcharge.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that confirmation. I was not aware of that settlement treatment. Thanks.
All right. Do we want to move on and go to Robert Fisher? You can unmute yourself and lower your hand and ask your question.
Thank you. This is Robert Fisher with NV Energy. I have a question in regards to the process that you had in regards to CAISO opting into this program. In the equation, you included a 5% of net load. I was curious why that number was chosen or why an additional buffer item was chosen for that item, because in my mind, the RA already has additional considerations taken into consideration. I'm curious why this plus 5% of demand forecast was added.
Yeah, I can answer this one, Robert. So yeah, we have RA and we even have our contingency reserves. So your first thought would be, well, you've got RA and you've got your contingency reserves. Why put 5% more? And the simple answer is it's because of that 8-day out. It's, 8 days out, the load and the weather 8 days out is almost a guess. So that's what that 5% is. It's that 8 days out. If it were, hey, I could opt in tomorrow, I would think that 5% should be eliminated.
Is 5% chosen because that's the error within an 8-day window? Is that your make at an 8-day window, or is it just a rough approximation?
Rough approximation. It's also close to what we usually do in the RUC net short time frame. So those were the reasons why that number was picked.
Okay, that helps. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, the next question is from Tony Gerard. Tony, you can unmute yourself and also lower your hand.
Hi, Tony Gerard from Power Settlements. If the CAISO BAA should decide to opt in, would the market participants know that that has happened? Will there be some sort of notification or some reports ahead of time? Or is it?
Yes, we can answer this one too. There are two things. The ISO committed that we would send out a market notice, and that's just we're not going to do a market notice for other BAs. We also have an OASIS report that shows for everyone who's opted in and who's opted out.
Oh, okay. I must have missed that then. Okay. I'll wait till we get to the reports then. That's great. Thank you.
All right, next question is Todd Ryan. You can unmute yourself and lower your hand.
I'm Todd Ryan from Pacific Gas and Electric. I just would like to note that I think it's inappropriate that we're having a discussion today around the CAISO opt-in, opt-out process. This is a decision for the members of the CAISO balancing area, and unless the other 24 WEIM members are also going to have a public stakeholder process for their opt-in, opt-out decisions, I don't think it's appropriate for this to be a debate or a discussion amongst other participants. So that's my personal opinion. And so I just, for note for CAISO staff, that I don't think it's an appropriate way in which to discuss this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, you know what? So we put all this criterion in the BPM, excuse me. And we wanted to show, due diligence and that we weren't just going to opt in the entire time and for full transparency. But, I think I agree with you. Maybe it's not appropriate to go in, at least to go into as much detail and just say, and by the way, the ISO's criterion is in our BPM, and if you want to check it out and have questions, go there. And so, yeah, I see your point.
And just one last thought, it may be worth thinking about how in the future, when there are, because the WEIM and the EDAM are set up such that the balancing areas are the players in this game that we call the market, how we discuss as a subset of stakeholders, the ISO balancing area stakeholders, how we discuss the balancing area decisions in an appropriate stakeholder forum. Thank you.
Good point, Todd. Thank you. I do not see any other questions, Mo, at this point, and there's nothing else in the chat. So you might want to continue.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, everyone. Great questions, by the way. This is really going to help us, improve this process together as a whole. So good questions, and I appreciate you guys sharing those. So let's go ahead and move on to the next topic, which is going to be the settlement charges. So we went over the energy assistance transfer. Now, earlier I mentioned that if you decide to opt in for the assistant energy transfer, it does come with a cost. And again, the cost is more of a penalty, right? This is something that is not part of your normal charges. So this is something that we refer to as a surcharge. So as a result of this, we've created two additional charge codes, settlement charge codes, charge code 6476 and 6479. 6476 essentially is the surcharge. That's what we're going to be charging those WEIM BAAs or CAISO BA for opting in and using this product. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now, as I mentioned, these are new charge codes that were created as a result of the assistant energy transfer. This is a surcharge, so it's a penalty in the event that you decide to opt in and you end up using this product. Just to kind of preface this with, even if you opt in and you end up not needing to leverage the additional supply from your neighbors, you do not get charged. You only get charged when you do leverage that additional supply, even though you opt in. So I do want to clarify that. So again, this new charge code for the surcharge, 6476, is a penalty assessed for WEIM BAAs that are insufficient and have failed their resource sufficiency evaluation test for their capacity and their flex upward. The information that this calculation will receive is going to come from the real-time base schedule. So it's going to come at T minus 40 when you're financially binding, and it will include the corrections to anything that you've adjusted as you're going through the RSE test. So it will receive the latest information. Settlements is going to incorporate the hourly base, incorporate the cost for an hour on an hourly basis for the real-time bid cap, which will most likely be $1,000 per megawatt or $2,000 per megawatt, depending on what the conditions are at that moment. It's very rare for it to be $2,000 because in those instances, there would have to be something that would have happened during the heat wave, maybe 1 or 2 days of the year where it requires you to be leaning on additional generators. So most likely, it's usually about $1,000 megawatt per hour. Now, for the CAISO BAA, if they do receive this surcharge, how does it get divvied up within the scheduling coordinator? It is going to be in the event that the CAISO BAA does opt in and does have to leverage the additional supply, then in those instances, they're going to apply the measured demand, the pro rata measured demand methodology to be able to divvy up those costs. And again, we want to make sure that in the event that we do have to opt in, they will be evaluated, and in those cases, they will be divvied up, and it will follow that pro rata measured demand process for the CAISO BAA in the event that they opt in. Now, for WEIM BAs that do decide to opt in, settlements is going to allocate those charges, those penalty surcharges. I do want to emphasize it's a surcharge, it's an additional fee, it's a penalty to the respective entity SC, and the entity SC can suballocate those costs at their discretion. So they decide how they're going to divvy up those costs essentially. And I did provide a link to the PRR for the settlements and billing that does detail the calculation for the new configuration guide. It hasn't been posted yet, but it will be posted prior to Market Sim, so that way you'll be able to go in there and review it on the BPM page on our public site. But in the meantime, this is submitted as a PRR, and then that way you can go in and review those calculations from the config guide. And again, for the BAs that decide to opt out, these charges will be set to 0 because there's no fee. If you're not opting in, you're not going to be charged, and it's going to be set to 0. Now, the other piece to this was the allocation charge code, meaning that in the event that a WMBA or CAISO BAA has to leverage its neighbor's extra supply, they're going to be charged. Now, here is where those that were able to provide that extra energy to the BAs that are insufficient, they're going to receive the revenue, and when they receive the revenue, they're going to be able to use the charge code 6479 to be able to allocate. So a settlement is going to apply this charge code essentially to allocate those revenues accordingly to the to the BAs that were able to provide those extra energy to those that were insufficient. And again, this is all done through the pro rata methodology to make sure that it is divvied up accordingly. Louise, I'm going to see if I want to know if you have anything else you want to add in addition to this, to the specific charge code, one or the other. Do you have any additional input that you want to share or elaborate? And Louise is with our settlement team.
Yeah, no, I think you covered that perfectly, unless there's questions that I can address. But as far as your slides, I think those are summarized pretty accurately.
Okay, so now we have time for questions. So any questions? Cindy, do we have any questions specific to the settlement charge code?
I do not see any questions in the chat or any hands raised. So if you have a question, raise your hand or type it in.
Okay, and again, there's a request to return to slide 30. Okay, from Melissa. Melissa, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Or you just want to just review the information? I'll leave this here for maybe another minute so that way you can see what the information covers. And again, this specific slide is for charge code 6479, and this is for the allocation. So the allocation of the revenue for folks that were able to provide that extra energy to their neighbors who were insufficient. And yes, Cindy, you're right. We will be providing the recording for today's training on the respective website. So we'll send out all the details after this meeting. We may be modifying some of the slides to incorporate some of the questions you guys have asked. We want to make sure that we're clear on those items. So we will be modifying the existing slide, but the recording from today's training will be out there on the public site before the end of today or within the next 24 to 48 hours at most. All right, if there is no further question, I'll go ahead and move on to the next one. So now let's talk about the OASIS and CMRI reports. Earlier, I alluded to the fact that there's going to be a new report in addition to some updates to some existing reports. Let's talk about OASIS first. Oops. Nope. Actually, I take it back. We're going to talk about CMRI. CMRI, there are two existing reports that that contain specific data elements. Here you see that in CMRI for the bid range capacity test results under the energy imbalance market tab, you see that there are these columns that contain information under the insufficiency percentage, insufficiency amount for the megawatts, and then the requirement amount megawatt. This information is going to essentially move over to OASIS. So it's currently, as of today, it's currently in the CMRI report. We are going to be moving the information over to OASIS. For here, you would have to have a certificate to be able to access the CMRI application. Going forward, the data will no longer be published. It will be updated. The updated data will be in OASIS. However, the historical pre-activation data will still continue to stay on this report in the meantime up to, I believe the last date will be up to 6/1. I do have some folks from our that were working on the OASIS and CMRI reports to make sure that I didn't forget any other important key information. But essentially, these data elements will be moving from CMRI to OASIS. Any information that was there prior to the 6/1 activation date will continue to stay in CMRI. Anything new after that will move on to the new location, which will be in OASIS, which we'll cover next. And it also will not affect any data via your UI, your API will not be affected by this. So go on to the next one. The second report from CMRI is the flexible requirement sufficiency test results. This report also in CMRI has the same information, these three data elements under the energy imbalance market. Again, this is these reports are specific to WEIM, BAAs. These elements will no longer, as I mentioned, similar to the previous report, will no longer be in CMRI and is also going to OASIS. Same criteria. Information will continue to be published all the way up until 6/1. After that, historical data will remain, and the new data will be available in OASIS in a separate report. Now let's talk about OASIS. Earlier I mentioned that there is a new report in OASIS, and it's called the Market Bid Cap. This report will be available in production on June 1st. It will be, and it's not already, it will be available in map stage. And this is where you'll be able to go into OASIS and validate the bid cap information for that respective operating date. So this is a new report that was not there, but is there now, is going to be available, like I said, for our market, for the market sim. You'll be able to go in there and validate this in OASIS, but in production, you'll be able to see this data starting on 6/1, and it will detail the information for the market bid cap. Now, this information is currently available, but in Cyber under the message tab. So if you go into Cyber, you'll see that you'll have visibility to the market bid cap. What we want to do as part of this RSEE Phase 2 Track 1, make this information readily available in OASIS so that way you can go in and verify what the market bid cap is for that operating hour for that specific trade date. Earlier, someone had mentioned, how do we see the data? How do we see? But these are the reports that are being updated to show that information. Now, let's move on to, also I do want to clarify that again, this report does publish in real time, and does publish the real-time market bid cap, again, for the $1,000 or $2,000 on an hourly basis. So as I also mentioned earlier, it is available currently available in Cyber. Now, we talked about those two reports, those data elements that were in CMRI that are going to be moved to OASIS. Now, this is the report in OASIS. So it's an existing report in OASIS that is now going to contain that new set of data elements in here. And again, this is the WEIM RSE capacity test. Here, you're going to be able to see under the data type, you're going to see those elements that we saw in CMRI. Again, after activation of the production activation date, you're no longer going to see the current data there. You're going to see it here. But those data elements will exist for prehistoric activation. I guess you could say data prior to 6/1. Okay. The next report is the flexible ramp requirements input and output. This is the other location where those data elements will be available as well. Here you see insufficiency percentage, amount, requirement amount. So again, they will be here. This is available, I believe, for map stage. So you can go in there and validate this information. For production, it will be available starting 6/1, and same criteria applies as the previous report, where new data will be published in this in OASIS as opposed to CMRI. With that, Cindy, are there any questions specific to the reports, the CMRI or the OASIS report?
I see that Alva has his hand raised. Alva, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Cindy. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a little bit low on the volume. Just a second.
No, you're fine. I just had muted myself, so I didn't answer. Very quick.
Okay. Just the information about the opting into assistance energy. Is there anything available in any report about that? As if, for example, will we know whether the ISO has opted in?
So I believe Michael Martin mentioned earlier that if the CAISO BA decides to opt in for assistant energy transfer, there will be a market notice that would be sent out, so that way you see that we are opting in on behalf of the CAISO BAA. So that will go out for through the market notice platform. For the WIM BAA, I didn't include in this one because this one is information for the WMBA is actually going to be available in the BAOP tool. And the BAOP tool is essentially used for situational awareness. So there is a page on there that will let you know which WMBA opted in for the assistant energy transfer. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, for the CAISO BA, you're going to get a market notice to let you know we're opting in for assistant energy transfer. For WIM, you're going to see the information in the BAOP tool. So it's going to tell you who is currently opted in for AET. So there'll be a column called Assistance, and you'll be able to see who from the WMBA have opted in. And we'll make sure that we share that information to that extent for the WMBAs. We'll share that in a screenshot of that in the WIM biweekly meeting, so that way you'll be able to have an idea as to how it's going to look like. But for the purpose of today's training, we wanted to make sure that we kept it as generic as much as possible. So, but yeah, 2 different platforms in terms of how you're notified who's opted in. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I can see that it, like in my mind, you should evolve ultimately toward having a report on this because it is relevant to validating market results against settlements. And so knowing exactly when a constraint is being used versus when it isn't, there should be a systematic way to get that data relatively easily. And maybe one thing I could ask is that if you can publish just a one pager on how you would collect that data based on exactly what you just said, so that we can sort of, I don't know if we can do it in Market Sim, but at least we can start putting together a process to collect that data as we go into production. It would be very helpful because things that are simply done in this ad hoc way are hard to cross-validate against things that are being done in a more automated way. But I appreciate that it's hard to just come up with something like that on a dime. So I'm not asking for that. I just think you might want to evolve toward that.
No, that's a great feedback.
Hey, so I'm thinking that we might have missed a slide in here, but we are creating an OASIS report for Assistance Energy showing every entity who's opted in and opted out by which hour.
Yeah, I thought you were saying something like that before, but I didn't see that in the list of things that we're gone over. Yeah.
Mo is correct here that it's also in BAOP, and that's for operators, and that's also a BAOP operator can see all their neighbors, which is important from a real-time standpoint. But the OASIS report is outlined in the BPM we submitted. I think it's BPM 1500. For those that want to go check it out.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we must have dropped that slide.
Well, you've answered my question. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it much.
I'll check on that, and I'll add that to here to make sure that we cover that. So thank you, Michael. And Alba, thank you for following up with that question.
Mo, Tony Gerard has a question. Tony, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Just a quick follow-up. I don't believe in the OASIS latest tech specs that I've seen any report such as that was mentioned for opt-in and opt-out. So just to follow up, that would be very helpful.
Yes, it's out in BPM, and it would go in, when this goes in, presumably June 1. Yeah, I can forward to Cindy and Mo the BPM text that shows a little more detail.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Tony. So yeah, we'll make sure that we include that additional piece of information coming from PRR 1500, so that way it'll detail who's opted in the OASIS report. So apologies for that, but I will make sure we include that as well. Any other questions?
I do not. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Stanley Ng with PCI. If I have a technical question on mapping between some of the data in CMRI to OASIS, who could I send that to?
I would recommend, I was going to say, submit it in a city ticket, and then make sure you submit it using the Market Sim designation, and I'll provide that in the, well, actually, we're going to go into Market Sim as our next topic. So that will cover in terms of where you'll be sending your questions to. If there's no further questions, I'll go ahead and move on to the Market Sim.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions.
Thank you, Cindy. All right, let's talk about Market Sim timeline. So Great follow-up question, by the way, perfect timing. If you have any questions, but let's start off with, we want to make sure that you guys have a chance to participate in the market sim. The registration deadline was April 23rd, but you can still register. So make sure, because we want to make sure that you guys have an opportunity to, validate the information that we're changing. And if you have questions related to the RSEE Phase 2 Track 1, we want to still make sure that those get addressed too outside of the two scenarios that we'll be covering. So email our market sim folks, ask them, let them know that you want to register. You still have time. We want to make sure you get to validate your information. The question that you had, in terms of how you're going to structure the API or whatnot for CMRI or OASIS, send it to this platform right here. They're going to be able to work with those respective SMEs to get you that answer whilst we're going through market sim. So I encourage you guys to do that. The market sim meetings will start on April 27th. So that's tomorrow, actually. And so I encourage you guys to attend, ask us questions. If we didn't get a chance to cover the questions you had in this training, this is also another opportunity for you to continue those conversations. And if we need to update any materials that we have out there, but more importantly, ask your questions in those platforms. Our folks are here to help you guys as we're preparing you for the upcoming production deployment. So I encourage you guys to attend the Market Sim meeting. And then also, as stated, Market Sim is going to be starting on May 1st. So it's coming up pretty soon. It's going to be an opportunity for you to test out the new functionalities. But more importantly, I do encourage you guys to register for the Market Sim and then attend those meetings. We want to hear your voice. So with that being said, are there any other questions specific to Market Sim? I do have some folks from the Market Sim on here as well.
I don't see any questions right now. Well,
okay, perfect. No, I want to hear your questions, but let's go ahead and move on to, I just wanted to give you guys a screenshot of one of the unstructured scenarios. This one is specific to the assistant energy transfer. So this is where we're going to simulate, your WEIM entity or KISO-BA opting in for this new product, and then it's going to go through the validation process, and you're going to be able to see what the output, what the charges will look like. So this is an opportunity for you to kind of simulate what it'll look like if you decide to opt in and fail the RSE test, and you'll see all the charge codes associated with it. Next one is going to be specific to the tagging changes. So we're going to be monitoring the submission of the GFP export. So you're going to be submitting as a firm provisional. We're going to be able to verify, and our operator is going to be able to verify that you did submit it correctly, and then you're also going to be able to verify on your system that it was submitted in accordance. So again, two different unstructured scenarios for you guys to test out. Earlier I mentioned, if you have any questions, we encourage you to submit them again during this Market Sim time. Make sure that when you submit them in city, make sure you designate for the functional environment, designate the Market Simulation Summer 2023, because this is the one that they'll be using to track these RSEE Phase 2 Track 1 related questions. So make sure you designate for your functional environment in city the Market Simulation Summer 2023, so that way we can make sure those get routed appropriately. All right, I know we're also getting towards the end of our training, but I do want to make sure I go over a few items. We talked today, just want to recap, we talked about the new tagging rules as it impacts the lower priority exports for the KISO-BAA. There are some changes. We're asking for your help on submitting your e-tags a certain way to help us be able to make the appropriate decisions on which resources to curtail in extreme conditions. So again, we have a lot of questions that we've gotten from you, great feedback. We're going to take that and update the material to make sure that those are included. In addition, we just talked about the assistant energy transfer product. This is where it impacts the WEIM BAAs and the KISO-BAA. It is something new. You guys are still, in the early stages trying to determine if this is the right product for you. And if it is, here's the process you would follow to be able to elect to opt in. And then, of course, with that being said, there's also new settlement charge codes that's going to help, make sure that everyone is, that everyone is assessed those appropriate fees, and those that benefit will be able to receive those revenues because they were able to pass the RSE test and be able to provide the extra energy. So this is where you get to leverage your neighbors, but it does come at a cost. In addition, we talked about the OASIS report. I will include the additional report that Michael Martin mentioned in the updated slide, so that way you can see, you'll be able to see who has opted in for the assistant energy transfer. And lastly, Market Sim, like I mentioned, Market Sim is coming up. It's right around the corner. The first Market Sim meeting is scheduled for tomorrow. If you haven't registered, register for it, because we want to be able to allow you to have the opportunity to test the new functionality and ask those questions. Maybe there's something we haven't considered or something that you want clarification on. Our folks are here. We have a plethora of SMEs here today to be able to answer those questions for you. And so as we're going through this journey together, we want to make sure that we do this right, and we want to make sure we include you guys, both the CAISO BAA and the WEIM and BAA, to be able to help make sure that this process is, we're adhering to, those guidelines, and also incorporating your feedback as we're trying to figure out this process. So with that being said, there are a few things that I do want to leave with you before I close out. As I mentioned, there were some BPM changes, so I just want to give you some reference links so that way you can refer to them at your leisure. The BPMs that were impacted are these 4 BPMs. These are the tariff changes, tariff sections that were impacted, so I'll leave this here. And then also the impacted systems, the ones that we called out today that really you'll need to make sure you're aware of are these specific ones: master file, BAOP, settlements, OASIS, CMRI, city. These are the applications that are being impacted. I also provided a description of what exactly is transpiring within these applications. And of course, some terminology, so that way you heard some terms being thrown around just to kind of help make it a little easier. And then lastly, the resources. So I've given you some links to some resources, and you can look at this later on, but it lists also the PRs, as Michael mentioned earlier. There was one for OASIS for PR 1500, so the links are also on here. We'll update this material accordingly, making sure we incorporate your feedback and add anything that we may have left out. I think we have about 9 minutes left before the end of today. I want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions, or even if the SMEs want to add anything in addition.
Well, I see that Alva has a question. Alva, you want to go ahead and ask it?
Yeah, I was just looking at the way you describe market simulation as unstructured scenarios, and this isn't a question necessary for today, but for tomorrow, we'll certainly want to know what your bandwidth is actually going to be, because it's more almost like structured scenarios. The ISO has to trigger probably multiple RSE failures, and it's not easy to do that in the real-time market, because it's very easy to just break the market altogether in trying to do that kind of thing. So I would maybe urge you to have some idea of what your bandwidth is going to be like, and how you're planning on scheduling those events. It's important for us to be ready then to test during those periods when you expect to trigger failures. But I don't think it's definitely not just something where we on our side are going to be putting in, like, it's not just going to be, there's obviously that tagging exercise, which is very important, but in terms of the, RSE test and the assistance energy, we need to know what your plans are for scheduling those failures, so we can look and see what happens in our BAA and what happens in terms of the system overall. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Alice, that's a great feedback, and that's a great question to ask during our Market Sim meeting. So I hope you do attend tomorrow, because that's going to be something we want to look into as well. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Alva. Mo, there's a question from Mariano. So Mariano, unmute yourself and ask your question. There's also a question in the chat, and I'll get to that one next.
Thank you. So I wasn't aware of Market Sim until this meeting. So as I understand, tomorrow there's a informational meeting about Market Sim. And then when Kaiso says Market Sim starts on May 1st, that means that starting May 1st, Kaiso is going to work individually with the different EIMBAs to run these tests, is what I'm understanding. And how long will that go for? So it starts May 1st, and when is that expected to wrap up? Or
yeah, I can speak to that. Thank you, Mariano. So those are good questions, and I'm sorry that we haven't been able to engage with you in more detail sooner. So to set expectations about tomorrow, so we'll have a call that's on the public calendar from 2 to 3 Pacific, and that will kind of go over the overall timeline of market simulation, our objectives, the systems impacted, the state of the environment, and any prerequisite action that's needed from our customers or internally to set up the environment and facilitate a successful market simulation exercise. So in that meeting, we'll share more into details of what to expect, how to get access to the system that we'll want to work on with you on, especially if you haven't participated before. The market simulation will start on May 1st, and again, the expectation is that if you have the access that you need, which we can work with you to get, is you can access our map stage environment and look at all the system changes there, and and have your hands-on experience with these system changes. And then starting on trade date May 2nd, we'll also be settling in map stage. So based on the inputs and data and conditions that are set up in map stage, those will be reflected all the way through to settlements as well for that end-to-end validation. And we will settle Tuesdays and Thursdays for the month of May. And we will have the environment open for most of that month as well, for unstructured testing as well. And another expectation would be that there are the scenarios, there may need to be intervention from the ISO. So usually what we do is we pick a couple of trade dates to start with, where we will say, all of the data is set up to run these conditions, and our team will be on standby to trigger those conditions in the environment in order to see the expected results and demonstrate the functionality in the map stage environment. And we'll communicate those dates as well as the outcomes of those in the market simulation call that kicks off tomorrow and also repeats every Monday and Thursday. So I think the first step is if you have, if you have city, you can submit a city and just ask to register to participate in market simulation, but I'll also take your information offline and reach out to you separately to make sure that you have what you need to get started, and we'll have some other data for you to submit and such as well. So.
A question just came in the chat that says, what specific scenarios will be gone through in Market Sim?
Right, and thank you for advancing the slides. So currently, we have 2 identified scenarios that you can see here. And one is, again, for the simulation of assistance energy transfer opting in. And so this, again, just walks you through kind of the actions to go through city and submit that flag, and then the data set up on our side. And then on the ISO side, when it comes to the specific day that we'll choose that, ISO will also take action to cause failures and such to trigger that. And then the other one is this submission of GFP export and e-tagging. And so that's more, that's less structured and requires less intervention. Actually, customers are able to tag in map stage accordingly now, but what we'll do is we're just encouraging you to build this into your test suite and then support this. But again, it requires less coordination, but it's an important functionality that we want to make sure is on your radar to test. And then any unstructured testing, again, the environment will be available. So if there's additional testing that you'd like to do, you can do so on your own. And if you need some coordination with the ISO, those market simulation calls as well as cities are good tools to be able to engage with us to support additional testing needs outside of this.
Thank you, Trang. There was one other question in the chat, which was, can DDAECON/RTECON be incorporated into slide 51? Maybe that's just more of a comment for when we update the slides to think about that. There are some other comments in the chat. If you weren't following the chat before you sign up, you might want to take a look at them. Other than that, I don't see any other questions. So Mo, you can take it from here.
And Trang, thank you so much for providing that clarification, MarketSim. A lot of good input that was provided today. Again, you know, we have a full team of subject matter experts on the call who are ready to help, you know, answer your questions. So if you don't get a chance to answer your question in this platform, please feel free to submit those tickets, so city tickets, and submit them through MarketSim, the address that we provided earlier, and then we'll be able to have our MarketSim folks will be able to coordinate with their respective parties to get you those answers. So again, thank you for joining us today. Great feedback. Thank you to all our speakers, and thank you for all the participants that joined us. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mo. Did a great job.